For centuries, American Indians were stripped of their rights, land, and culture through unfulfilled compromises with the United States. During the 1960s and 70s, Indian activists established the American Indian Movement, protesting for indigenous rights, renewal of culture, and self-determination. Activists took initiative by claiming federal land for Indian cultural and educational uses, protesting at government facilities and reservations, and holding marches across the nation. Impeding the activists was the federal government, which did not hesitate to bring armed forces to seize their cause. Although the conversation between the two forces often led to violent conflicts, Indians and the U.S. government set compromises, which guaranteed Indian sovereignty and rights. Through the American Indian Movement, activists of all tribes and ages fought for their freedom stolen from them so long ago. In 1887, Congress issued the General Allotment Act in an attempt to assimilate Indians into American culture. Henry Dawes argued that to be civilized, Indians must wear civilized clothes, cultivate the ground, live in houses, ride in Studebaker wagons, send children to school, drink whiskey, and own property.
The boarding school system was set up, which was a major means of forced acculturation.
In 1953, the Eisenhower administration pursued the Indian termination and relocation policy, seeking to eliminate reservations and transfer Indians into urban society. However, many still lived impoverished lives while facing extreme racism and brutality. Gary Gamble, a Native American, claimed that the art of denying Indians their rights has been refined to a science. Angered by these conflicts, a group of 200 Indians established the American Indian Movement, inspired by other civil rights movements occurring during the time.
There's been over 500 treaties made between Indian nations here and the federal government. Every one of them are being violated. We weren't allowed to hunt and fish, so we made our movement was a treaty movement to get them to live up to their treaty obligations with Indian people.
AIM established the Minneapolis AIM Patrol, which monitored law enforcement practices in Indian ghettos, and the Legal Rights Center, which provided lawyers to Indians.
First, we built our own schools. They still learn reading, writing, math, and all that, but they do it with Ojibwe language. They start taking back the culture. And Indian people all over the country start picking up on what we were doing.
Concurrently, a group of Indian college students reclaimed the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary as Indian land following the facility's closure. The students cited the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, that no white person or persons shall be permitted to settle upon or occupy any portion of Indian land. Thus, 79 activists overtook the island November 20th, 1969. Naming themselves the Indian of all tribes, they issued the Alcatraz Proclamation that claimed that Alcatraz Island is more than suitable for an Indian reservation, since 1. It is isolated from modern facilities, 2. It has no fresh running water, 3. It has inadequate sanitation facilities, among other reasons.
Alcatraz symbolically was incredibly important. And of course, they riffed off of that symbolism of that being a prison island.
The activists' ultimate objective was to transform the island into an American Indian Studies and Spiritual Center.
The whole world came and photographed it, and so people were very, very supportive. People were very interested in Native Americans.
With the rise of mass media, the practice of politics was transformed. Soon, the federal government shut down all electricity, telephone services, and suppliers from the mainland. On June 11, 1971, officers removed the remaining 15 occupiers on the island. This did not deter the Indian cause. In 1972, as Nixon was re-elected into office by the silent majority, the Trail of Broken Treaties brought a caravan of 600 AIM activists to Washington, D.C.
And the walk started in Washington State, and we organized our way across the country, and we then wrote a 20-point solution paper,
which requested the restoration of constitutional treaty-making authority, the protection of Indians' religious freedom and cultural integrity, and other solutions involving health, housing, and education issues. AIM occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs until the federal government agreed to their manifesto. Once again, television and newspaper coverage allowed AIM to display their social and political movement to the entire world. The federal government compromised with the Indians to end the occupation. However, they never considered the proposal.
We were about to go in and remove them forcibly, and they decided to take the money. They took the $63,000. They abandoned the Bureau of Indian Affairs building, which they trashed.
The FBI was extremely energetic in trying to go after members of AIM in an effort to ultimately stop them.
This most notable conflict between AIM and the government occurred in 1973 at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Dick Wilson, tribal chairman of the Oglala Lakota Sioux of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, has been accused of corruption. Wilson led a personal protection gang which abused Indians who already suffered from unsafe living conditions. As a result, 200 armed aimed activists claimed the town of Wounded Knee, prompting FBI agents and federal marshals to arrive at the site.
They kicked everybody out of their homes. The judges ordered us there to keep the current people in power and make sure that there was not an armed insurrection.
Once again, AIM demanded recognition of their rights and the honoring of treaties. This time, they would not compromise unless the requests were met, leading to a firefight that lasted for weeks. Contrasting prior occupations, the conflict at Wounded Knee was quite violent, leading to some controversy as well as splits in the Indian leadership. Soon, Pine Ridge appeared to be a war zone, as described by veterans who had just returned from Vietnam. Armored cars, fighter jets, helicopters, attack dogs, and searchlights were brought into the area.
We engaged in gunfights on a daily and nightly basis. Your adrenaline's running pretty high for a long period of time. I remember when one of my friends got killed, the U.S. Marshal.
The Indians were being supplied by backpackers. About a month into the occupation, it became clear that the Indians were having a difficult time feeding themselves. We put together what came to be known as the Wounded Knee Airlift. We had 3 very large single-engine planes, and we were able to parachute about 2,000 pounds of food into the village. A lot of white people were aware of how much that little village meant to American Indians. There was great public sympathy.
In fact, public figures such as Johnny Cash and Jane Fonda pledged their support. Furthermore, Marlon Brando sent Sachin Littlefeather to reject his Academy Award for Best Actor in order to raise awareness of the Indian plight. Eventually, after 71 days, negotiations went underway and a compromise was reached. The U.S. promised to investigate the AIM's complaints. However, nearly 12,000 Indians were arrested. While the public focused on the Watergate scandal, a total of 275 court cases surrounding the incident and Wounded Knee ensued, lasting 8 months in total. The U.S. judge dismissed all charges due to government misconduct and manipulation of evidence and witnesses by the FBI. Moreover, the defense argued that the government lacked jurisdiction under the 1868 treaty with the Sioux Nation. Also, they argued for the constitutionality of the Major Crimes Act and the Civil Disobedience Act of 1969. The actions of the American Indian movement were critical to bringing attention to the issues faced by American Indians, beginning with the occupation in Alcatraz in 1968. The activists inspired a variety of Indian communities nationwide to partake in over 200 acts of civil disobedience. Ultimately, the widespread media was a factor that brought success to the Indians. Protests increased public awareness, which compelled the federal government to provide their rights.
Government is the final arbiter of conflict within the society. So government has to find a way of compromising between these demands, however righteous they may be, and come up with a practical solution.
The movement led to the reversal of the Indian termination and relocation policy. In 1975, the Nixon administration passed the Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act to provide educational services and opportunities which will permit Indian children to compete and excel in life areas of their choice, and to achieve the measure of self-determination essential to their social and economic well-being. New legislation that protected natural resources and tribal land, and it led to the renewal of tribal culture and traditions. For the first time, many Indian youths discovered their identities through the exploration of their ancestry, art, customs, rituals, dress, and language. After centuries of oppression and silence, the Indian people finally had a voice through organizations such as AIM, and those that were inspired by it, such as the Women of All Red Nations, a group that focused on resolving issues faced by women in indigenous communities. This vast movement in the United States inspired indigenous people in Canada and other nations as well. In 1977, indigenous people saw a victory with the creation of the International Indian Treaty Council, a non-government organization within the United Nations. Today, activists continue to lead protests not only with their original intentions, but different causes as well. For instance, AIM activated multiple longest walks, which activists marched to Washington, D.C. to protest drug abuse, health issues, and environmental rights. The truth is a plethora of issues, such as substance abuse and unemployment, still plague Indian reservations. Despite these challenges, the American Indian movement was significant in sparking cultural pride and raising awareness and guaranteeing self-determination for the Indian people. Through conflicts and compromises with the U.S. government, activists fought for social, political, and economic equality in an era of massive liberal change. With nothing but their spirit and determination, Indians were able to influence the standing federal policy and forever change the public perception of the American Indian.